They called her the climbing wife, the silent shadow behind Arthur Sterling's glittering real estate empire. For 7 years, Diana endured the whispers in London's most exclusive circles. She wore the insults like she wore her diamonds, cold and heavy. But when Arthur handed her divorce papers at a charity gala, publicly branding her a gold digger who would get nothing, he didn't realize one fatal error. He thought he was discarding a dependent. He didn't know he was declaring war on the hidden owner of his own debt. This isn't just a divorce. It's a corporate execution. The air inside Annabelle's, the legendary private members club at 46 Berkeley Square, smelled of expensive oud, chilled champagne, and old money. It was the kind of Wednesday night where you could spot a minor royal in one corner and a tech billionaire in the other. Arthur Sterling, a man whose jawline was as sharp as his business practices, held court at the center table. At 45, Arthur was the face of Sterling & Co., a real estate firm that had reshaped the London skyline. He was loud, charismatic, and currently 3 scotches deep into a monologue about his latest acquisition near Hyde Park. Beside him sat Diana. At 32, she was the picture of the dutiful trophy wife. She wore a midnight blue velvet gown by Schiaparelli, her hair pulled back in a severe, elegant bun. She said nothing, her eyes fixed on the condensation sliding down her water glass. "The problem with the market," Arthur boomed, his voice carrying over the low hum of conversation, "is that everyone wants a piece of the pie, but no one wants to bake it. They just want to come in when it's warm and eat." He paused, looking around the table for laughter. He got it. Then he turned his gaze to Diana. The warmth drained from his eyes. "Isn't that right, darling? You know all about showing up just in time for the feast." The table went quiet. A few guests shifted uncomfortably. This wasn't the first time Arthur had taken a swipe at her in public, but the venom tonight was different. It was public. It was performative. "Arthur, you're tired," Diana said softly. Her voice was steady, betraying no emotion. "Perhaps we should call the driver." Arthur laughed, a harsh, barking sound. He reached into the inner pocket of his bespoke Savile Row jacket. He didn't pull out a cigar case. He pulled out a thick, folded envelope. "I'm not tired, Diana. I'm awake. Finally awake." He tossed the envelope onto the table. It landed between the crystal salt shaker and a bottle of Chateau Margaux. "You've been waiting for a payout. Well, here's the notice. I'm filing. Incompatibility. And before you run to some ambulance chaser, remember the prenup. You leave with what you came with, which, if I recall, was a distinct lack of taste and a mountain of student debt." The room seemed to stop. At the next table, a well-known British tabloids editor lowered his fork. This was gold. This was the end of the Sterling marriage. Live at Annabelle's. Diana didn't gasp. She didn't cry. She didn't even reach for the envelope. She simply looked at Arthur, her eyes dark and unreadable. "You're doing this here?" she asked. "In front of your investors? In front of the board?" "I want witnesses," Arthur sneered, pouring himself another drink. "I want everyone to know that Arthur Sterling doesn't get taken for a ride. You're a gold digger, Diana. Everyone knows it. I'm just the last one to say it out loud. Now take the papers and go. The driver will take you to a hotel. I've had the locks at the Kensington townhouse changed an hour ago." The humiliation was absolute. A gold digger. The label that had trailed her since she, a lowly archivist at a law firm, had married the rising real estate titan. Diana stood up. She smoothed the front of her gown. She didn't look at the papers. She looked Arthur dead in the eye. "You are making a mistake, Arthur," she said. It wasn't a threat. It sounded like a diagnosis. "The only mistake I made was 7 years ago," he retorted, raising his glass in a mock toast. "Get out." Diana turned and walked away. She moved with a strange, fluid grace, ignoring the pitying stares of the socialites and the hungry eyes of the press. She walked out of the club, past the doormen in their green coats and into the cold London rain. She didn't call the driver. She hailed a black cab. "Where to, love?" the cabbie asked. "The City," she said, checking her watch. It was 11 p.m. The Shard, offices of Blackwood and Thorne. The cabbie frowned in the rear-view mirror. "Bit late for a law firm, isn't it?" Diana pulled a phone from her clutch, not the iPhone Arthur paid for, but a sleek, encrypted device she kept hidden in the lining of her purse. "Not for this meeting," she replied. She dialed a number. It rang once. "It's done," she said into the phone. He triggered the clause. "Initialize Phase 2. I want the forensic team ready by morning." The next morning, the headlines were brutal. "Sterling stands tall. Tycoon dumps gold digger wife at Annabelle's." Arthur Sterling sat in the plush leather chair of his office overlooking the Thames, feeling invincible. His lawyer, Preston Gartside, paced the room. Preston was known in London as the Rottweiler. He charged £1,500 an hour and had never lost a high-profile divorce. "It's airtight, Arthur," Preston said, tapping the prenuptial agreement on the desk. "She signed it 7 years ago. No alimony, no claim to business assets, no claim to the properties acquired during the marriage. She gets a lump sum of £500,000. That's it. In London, that won't even buy her a closet," Arthur smirked. "She didn't even fight it last night. Just walked away. She knows she's beaten." "She's hired counsel, though," Preston noted, glancing at an email on his iPad. "Just came in, a notification of representation." "Who?" Arthur asked. "Bored? Some high street solicitor? Or did she find someone to work on contingency?" "Name is Benedict Hastings," Preston said, frowning. I don't know him. The firm is Blackwood and Thorne. I've heard the name, but they don't do family law. They do corporate mergers, international trade disputes. It's odd." "She's desperate," Arthur dismissed. "She grabbed the first lawyer she could find. Send them the standard intimidation package. Demand a gag order if she wants the £500K. I don't want her selling sob stories to the Daily Mail." 3 days later, the first preliminary hearing was set at the Central Family Court in Holborn. It was a formality, a chance for the lawyers to beat their chests. Arthur didn't even plan to attend, but Preston insisted. "It looks better for the press if you look somber and resolute." They sat on the right side of the courtroom. On the left sat Diana. She was wearing a simple grey suit, no jewellery. She looked small, vulnerable. Next to her sat Benedict Hastings. He was an older man, perhaps 60, with a tweed jacket that looked like it had seen better days and thick-rimmed glasses. He looked like a university librarian who had wandered into the wrong room. He was shuffling papers nervously. Arthur leaned over to Preston. "That's him? That's her dragon slayer? He looks like he's about to nap." Preston suppressed a chuckle. "This will be over by lunch." The judge, Justice Harper, a woman known for her no-nonsense approach to high-net-worth cases, entered. "All rise." "Mr. Gartside," the judge nodded. "And Mr. Hastings? I don't believe I've seen you in my court before." "No, my lady," Hastings said, his voice soft and polite. "My practice is usually elsewhere. But I am representing Mrs. Sterling in this matter." "Very well," Justice Harper sighed. "Mr. Gartside, I assume you are moving for a summary judgment based on the prenuptial agreement?" "We are, my lady." Preston stood up, buttoning his jacket. "The agreement is clear. Mrs. Sterling waived all rights. The marriage has irretrievably broken down due to her financial expectations not being met. We wish to expedite this to save the court's time." "Mr. Hastings?" The judge turned to the old man. Hastings stood up slowly. He didn't pick up the prenup. He picked up a single blue folder. "My lady," Hastings began, "we do not contest the validity of the prenuptial agreement regarding the assets Mr. Sterling held at the time of the marriage." Arthur smiled. "It was a surrender. However," Hastings continued, his voice suddenly losing its wobble, becoming steel-hard, We are not here to claim Mr. Sterling's assets. We are here to clarify the ownership of the liabilities." "Liabilities?" Preston scoffed. "My client has no significant debts." Actually, Hastings opened the blue folder. Mr. Sterling's company, Sterling & Co., is currently leveraged to the tune of £400 million. The primary creditor for these loans is a private equity firm based in Zurich called Chimera Holdings. Arthur stiffened. He knew Chimera. They were the silent backers who had funded his aggressive expansion last year. They were a faceless entity. He had never met the owner, just their proxies. "What does this have to do with a divorce?" Preston demanded. "This is a family court, not a boardroom." "It is relevant," Hastings said, "because according to the terms of the loan agreement signed by Mr. Sterling, there is a character clause. If the CEO is involved in a public scandal that damages the reputation of the investment, the creditor has the right to call in the full debt immediately." "So," Preston said, "you're threatening to call the bank?" "No," Hastings smiled. It was a cold, terrifying smile. "We don't need to call them. You see, the primary shareholder of Chimera Holdings is Mrs. Diana Sterling." The silence in the courtroom was instant and absolute. Arthur froze. "What?" Hastings turned a page. "And as the majority shareholder of the entity that owns your debt, Mrs. Sterling would like to inform the court that she considers last night's public display at Annabelle's a violation of the character clause. She is calling in the debt, all £400 million, payable within 24 hours. Arthur stood up, his face turning purple. "That's a lie. She's a secretary. She has no money." Diana finally looked at him. She didn't look vulnerable anymore. She looked bored. "Sit down, Arthur," she said, her voice echoing in the silent room. "I wasn't a secretary when we met. I was a forensic accountant investigating your father's tax evasion. I bought your debt 3 years ago when you overextended on the Canary Wharf project. I've owned you for half our marriage." The drive back from the central family court to the glass and steel fortress of Sterling & Co. was the longest of Arthur Sterling's life. The silence in the back of the Rolls-Royce Phantom was suffocating. Preston Gartside, usually full of bluster and strategy, was frantically typing on his phone, beads of sweat glistening on his forehead. "Stop typing," Arthur snapped, staring out the window at the grey London sky. "And tell me how this is possible. You vetted her. 7 years ago, you vetted her." Preston stopped typing. He looked pale. "We did, Arthur. We ran the standard checks. Diana Miller, born in Leeds. Father was a factory worker, mother a nurse. Scholarship to Oxford, decent grades, worked as a junior archivist at Halloway & Sons. Her credit score was average. She had student loans. It was all there on paper." "Then how," Arthur hissed, turning to face him, "does a factory worker's daughter own a Swiss private equity firm that holds my balls in a vice?" "Identity layering," Preston whispered, the realization dawning on him with horror. If the Diana Miller we investigated was a construct, or if the money came later. "Arthur, Chimera Holdings is a ghost ship. It doesn't publish member lists. It's domiciled in Zug, Switzerland. The only way to know who owns it is if they want you to know." Arthur slammed his fist into the leather armrest. "Fix it. Find a loophole in the loan agreement. The character clause, argue it's subjective. Argue that a divorce isn't a scandal. The clause specifies public disrepute," Preston noted grimly. "You did it at Annabelle's, Arthur. There were photos in Tatler this morning. You calling your wife a gold digger while she sat there silently? You handed them the evidence on a silver platter." When they arrived at the office, the atmosphere was funereal. The receptionists, usually bright and chirpy, avoided Arthur's gaze. He stormed past them into the boardroom, where his CFO, Nigel Pemberton, was pacing a hole in the carpet. Nigel looked like he hadn't slept in a week. "They froze the accounts, Arthur." "Who?" "Chimera, half an hour ago. They invoked an asset preservation order pending the repayment of the principal debt. I can't pay the contractors for the Kensington high-rise. I can't pay the suppliers for the Docklands project. Arthur, if we don't move money by Friday, the unions walk off the job. We're insolvent." Arthur felt the blood drain from his face. "Insolvent? We have $2 billion in assets. Illiquid assets," Nigel screamed, losing his composure. "Buildings we can't sell in 24 hours. And even if we could, Chimera has a lien on all of them. We can't sell a single brick without Diana's permission." Arthur sank into a chair. The reality of the trap was setting in. He hadn't just married a woman he didn't know. He had married a predator who had spent 7 years waiting for him to bleed. "Get out," Arthur said quietly. "Everyone get out except Preston." When the room cleared, Arthur pulled a burner phone from his safe. He dialed a number he hadn't used in years. "I need a meeting," Arthur said. "Tonight. And bring a dossier on Diana Sterling, née Miller. I don't care what it costs. Dig deeper than the standard checks. I want to know who she actually is." The meeting took place in a smoky back room of a pub in East London, far from the prying eyes of the city. Sitting across from Arthur was Kieran O'Malley, a private investigator who used to work for MI6 before he realized blackmail paid better than patriotism. O'Malley slid a thick manila envelope across the sticky table. He didn't look happy. "You're not going to like this, Mr. Sterling," O'Malley said, lighting a cigarette. Arthur tore open the envelope. The first photo was of Diana, but she looked different. Younger, sharper. She was shaking hands with a man Arthur recognized instantly. Sir Richard Blackwood, the reclusive mining magnate who had died a decade ago. "Who is she?" Arthur demanded. "She is Diana Miller," O'Malley explained. "That part is true. But what your lawyers missed is who her godmother was. Her mother, the nurse? She was the private palliative care nurse for Lady Eleanor Blackwood for 20 years. The Blackwoods didn't have children. When Sir Richard died, the estate went into a blind trust." O'Malley tapped the photo. "The beneficiary of that trust isn't a charity, Arthur. It's Diana. She inherited the Blackwood fortune, mining rights, tech patents, land in Scotland, 10 years ago. Estimated value? £4 billion. Arthur stared at the photo. "She was a billionaire when I met her?" "Richer than you," O'Malley smirked, "and smarter. She didn't want the fame. She liquidated the hard assets and moved everything into shadow equity firms like Chimera. She wanted to learn the real estate game, so she took a job as a lowly archivist at your law firm to watch how the big boys operated. That's where she met you." Arthur felt sick. He remembered how they met. He had dropped a file. She had picked it up. He had charmed her, thinking she was a naive girl awestruck by his power. He had bought her cheap jewelry, taken her to mid-tier restaurants, all the while thinking he was the generous prince. She must have been laughing the entire time. "Why?" Arthur whispered. "Why marry me? Why stay for 7 years?" "I dug into that too," O'Malley said, pulling out another document. It was a photocopy of an old police report. "Does the name Gavin Miller ring a bell?" "Her father, the factory worker." "He worked at a factory your father owned," O'Malley corrected. 30 years ago. Sterling Industries. There was a pension fund collapse. Your father raided the fund to save his own skin during the recession. Hundreds of workers lost their pensions. Gavin Miller committed suicide 6 months later due to the debt. The room spun. This wasn't a divorce. It wasn't even corporate warfare. This was a blood feud. "She didn't marry you for money," O'Malley said, extinguishing his cigarette. "She married you to dismantle you. She wanted to be close enough to sign the loan documents herself. She wanted to hold the pen when you signed your death warrant." Arthur stood up, knocking his chair over. "She can't do this. I'll expose her. I'll tell the world she's a fraud." "A fraud?" O'Malley laughed. "She used her real name. She signed a prenup that gave her nothing. She's the most honest woman you've ever met. You just never asked the right questions." Arthur threw a stack of cash onto the table and stormed out. He needed a drink, but more than that, he needed a weapon. If Diana wanted a war, He would give her one. He wasn't going to play by the rules of the family court anymore. The next morning, London woke up to a grey drizzle. But inside Arthur Sterling's penthouse, the heat was rising. Arthur had spent the night shredding documents. If Diana was coming for the company, she would send auditors. He had to hide the bribes, the corner cutting on the safety inspections, the offshore kickbacks, the skeletons that built the Sterling empire. At 8 a.m., his phone rang. It was Dmitry Volkov, a man whose official title was logistics consultant, but whose actual job was moving money that didn't want to be found. "It is done, Arthur," Dmitry's heavy voice rasped. "We have moved the liquid reserves, about £50 million, to the accounts in the Cayman Islands. Through the shell company in Panama. It is untouchable." "Good," Arthur exhaled, loosening his tie. "Let her take the buildings. Let her take the debt. I'll disappear with the 50 million and start over in Dubai. She won't see a penny of the cash." "One problem," Dmitry said. There was a pause. "I am trying to confirm the receipt, but the Cayman Bank is saying the funds bounced." "Bounced?" Arthur screamed. "It's a wire transfer. It can't bounce." "They say the originating account was locked at the moment of transfer by the compliance officer." "I am the compliance officer," Arthur yelled. "Not anymore." Arthur dropped the phone. He ran to his laptop and logged into the corporate banking portal. Access denied. User privileges revoked. Administrator D. Sterling. She was in the system. She hadn't just bought the debt. She had likely compromised the IT infrastructure months ago. Arthur grabbed his coat. He had to get to the office. He had a physical safe there with bearer bonds and gold. Unregistered assets. She couldn't freeze physical gold. He took the private elevator down to the garage. His driver was gone. The Rolls-Royce was gone. In its place sat his old Porsche 911, the one he hadn't driven in years. He cursed and got into the Porsche. He gunned the engine and peeled out of the garage. As he merged onto the highway, his phone buzzed. A text message. Sender, Diana. "The Caymans? Really, Arthur? That's so 1990s. I expected better." Arthur threw the phone onto the passenger seat. He was sweating profusely. He needed to get to the office, grab the bonds, and get to the airport. He arrived at the Sterling & Co. Tower at 9:15 a.m. A crowd was gathered outside. News vans. Protesters. Arthur pushed through the crowd, ignoring the microphones shoved in his face. "Mr. Sterling, is it true the company is bankrupt?" "Mr. Sterling, did you know about the safety violations in the East End project?" He froze. Safety violations? That was in the files he was shredding last night. He shoved past the security guard at the revolving doors. "Get out of my way!" The guard, a burly man named Harrigan, who had worked for Arthur for 10 years, didn't move. He crossed his arms. "I can't let you in, sir." "Excuse me?" Arthur's eyes bulged. "I own this building." "Not as of this morning, sir," Harrigan said, his face impassive. "Receivership. The administrators are upstairs now. They've locked down the building. No employees allowed in, especially not suspended executives." "Suspended?" Arthur screamed. "I am the CEO." The board voted via emergency session at 7 a.m. A voice came from behind him. Arthur spun around. Standing there, flanked by 2 police officers, was Benedict Hastings, Diana's lawyer. He looked less like a librarian now and more like an executioner. "Mr. Gartside tried to reach you," Hastings said calmly, "but you seem to have smashed your phone. The board, realizing the debt was being called in, voted to remove you to appease the creditor. It was a unanimous decision." "You can't do this," Arthur snarled. "I have things in there. Personal things." "If you mean the bearer bonds in the wall safe behind the Mondrian painting," Hastings said, adjusting his glasses, "those have been seized as evidence of embezzlement. You really shouldn't have moved company funds into personal physical assets, Mr. Sterling. It's a felony." Arthur felt the world tilt. She knew about the bonds. She knew about the safe. She knew everything. "Where is she?" Arthur hissed. "Where is that witch?" "Mrs. Sterling is inspecting her new acquisition," Hastings said, gesturing toward the elevator. "She's in the penthouse office. Your office." Arthur lunged for the elevator banks. The police officers stepped forward, hands on their tasers. "I wouldn't," one officer warned. "Let him up," a voice came over the building's intercom system. It was Diana's voice, calm, amplified, echoing through the marble lobby. "I want to see him." The officers stepped aside. Hastings gestured to the open elevator. Arthur straightened his jacket. He was cornered, stripped of his assets, and publicly humiliated. But he was Arthur Sterling. He was a brawler. If he could just get in a room with her, he could manipulate her. He could threaten her. He knew things about her. Or he would invent things. He rode the elevator to the 40th floor. The doors opened. The office was unrecognizable. His mahogany desk was gone. His hunting trophies were gone. The room was stripped bare, white and minimal. Diana stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, looking out over London. She was wearing a white power suit, sharp and immaculate. She turned to face him. "You changed the decor," Arthur said, trying to sound casual, though his voice shook. "I'm clearing out the rot," she replied. "You think you've won." Arthur stepped into the room. "But you forget who I am. I built this city. I have friends, powerful friends. If you destroy me, you destroy the value of the company you just bought. It's suicide." "I don't care about the value of Sterling and Co., Arthur," Diana said, walking slowly toward him. "I have £4 billion. I can burn this company to the ground and not even feel the heat. This isn't an investment. It's a demolition." "Why?" Arthur pleaded. "Because I was mean to you? Because I had a few mistresses? Is that it? You're destroying an empire over a bruised ego?" Diana stopped 5 feet from him. Her eyes were cold, like chips of ice. "You don't remember, do you?" she asked softly. "August 14th, 1998. Arthur frowned. "What?" "The Leeds textile factory strike," she said. "My father was leading the negotiation for the pension reinstatement. You were 25, fresh out of business school. Your father sent you to handle it." Arthur's memory flickered. He remembered a rainy day in Leeds, shouting workers. "You told them there was no money," Diana continued. "You stood on the loading dock and told 500 men that if they didn't go back to work, you'd shut the factory down and move it to Bangladesh. You mocked my father. You called him a loser who didn't understand economics. You broke him that day. He came home and cried. He hanged himself 2 days later." Arthur took a step back. That was business. I was a kid. I was doing what my father told me. And now I'm doing what I must," Diana said. "You called me a gold digger, Arthur. But I'm not digging for gold. I'm digging a grave." Arthur realized then that there was no negotiation. There was no settlement. "I have files on you," Arthur bluffed, his eyes darting around the room. "I know about the tax evasion in the Blackwood estate." "No, you don't," Diana smiled, "because I paid my taxes, every penny. Unlike you." She pressed a button on a remote in her hand. The wall screen flickered to life. It showed a live feed of the lobby downstairs. More police were entering. Serious police. The Serious Fraud Office, SFO. "They're here for you, Arthur," Diana said. "Embezzlement, bribery. And thanks to the files I decrypted from your private server last night, conspiracy to commit arson on the Docklands warehouses for the insurance money. Remember that?" Arthur turned to run, but the elevator doors opened. 2 detectives in suits stepped out. "Arthur Sterling," one said, holding up a badge, "you're under arrest." As they grabbed his arms and cuffed him, Arthur looked back at Diana. She wasn't smiling anymore. She was just watching, her face a mask of absolute, terrifying calm. "This isn't over," Arthur screamed as they dragged him away. "I'll fight you. I'll destroy you." Diana waited until the elevator doors closed. The silence returned to the office. She walked to the window and looked down at the tiny figures on the street below. She pulled her phone out and dialed a number. "It's done," she said. He's in custody. Phase 3 begins now. Phase 3? Benedict Hastings asked on the other end of the line. I thought this was the end. Oh no, Benedict, Diana whispered, watching the police car lights flash below. Prison is too easy. Now, we take everything else. Arthur Sterling had spent 6 weeks in HMP Wandsworth, a Victorian-era prison that smelled of damp stone and despair. It was a far cry from the penthouse at the Shard. He had been denied bail, deemed a significant flight risk after the prosecutors presented evidence of his attempt to flee to Dubai with £50 million of embezzled funds. But Arthur wasn't broken, he was enraged, and rage, for a man like Arthur, was fuel. He had fired his previous legal team. Preston Gartside was too soft, too worried about his own reputation. Arthur needed a wartime consigliere. He found one in Magnus Valerius, a barrister known in the murky underworld of London's elite as the Butcher of the Bailey. Magnus didn't care about the truth. He cared about doubt. If he could create enough doubt, the jury would deadlock. The trial began on a stormy Tuesday in November at the Old Bailey. The press gallery was overflowing. This was the divorce of the century turned trial of the decade. Diana sat in the front row of the public gallery, flanked by Benedict Hastings. She wore black, not mourning black, but the sharp, intimidating black of a judge's robes. She looked serene, almost bored, as the prosecution laid out the charges: fraud, embezzlement, arson, and bribery. Magnus Valerius stood up for the opening statement. He was a large man with a theatrical voice that boomed off the wood-panelled walls. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Magnus began, pacing in front of the box, "you have heard a story about a greedy tycoon, a villain. But what if I told you that Arthur Sterling is not the predator here? What if I told you he is the prey?" He pointed a thick finger at Diana. The prosecution wants you to believe that Mr. Sterling burned down his own warehouses for insurance money. But ask yourselves, who benefited from the collapse of Sterling and Co.? Who bought the debt for pennies on the dollar? Who stripped the company of its assets the moment she took control? The woman sitting right there. This wasn't a corporate collapse. It was a hostile takeover, disguised as a marriage. The gallery murmured. It was a bold, desperate narrative. The victim husband. Arthur watched Diana, waiting for a reaction. A flinch, a frown, anything. But she simply made a note in a small leather notebook. The first 3 days went poorly for Arthur. The forensic accountants, Diana's team, had done their work. They traced the wire transfers from the Cayman accounts back to shell companies registered in Arthur's name. They showed the emails where Arthur authorized the use of the substandard steel in the Kensington high-rise. But on the 4th day, Magnus played his ace. "The defense calls Thomas Tommy Biggs to the stand," Magnus announced. Diana's head snapped up. Benedict Hastings stiffened. Tommy Biggs was a ghost. He was the foreman of the Docklands warehouse that had burned down. He had disappeared the day after the fire. The police hadn't been able to find him. A rough-looking man with a scar running down his cheek shuffled to the stand. He took the oath. "Mr. Biggs," Magnus said softly, "you worked for Sterling and Co. for 15 years. You were there the night the warehouse burned down. Tell the court what happened." Biggs looked nervous. He glanced at Arthur, then at the jury. "I was told to torch it," Biggs said, his voice raspy. "I was told the insurance money was needed to cover some bad investments." "And who gave you that order?" Magnus asked. "Was it Arthur Sterling?" Biggs paused. The courtroom held its breath. "No," Biggs said. "It wasn't Mr. Sterling. He was in chaos that week. It was her." He pointed a trembling finger at Diana. "Mrs. Sterling. She came to the site. She told me Arthur was going to ruin the company and that we needed to liquidate the stock. She gave me 10 grand in cash and told me to light the match." Pandemonium erupted. The judge banged his gavel. "Order! Order in the court!" Arthur leaned back in his chair, a smug smile spreading across his face. He had found Biggs in a gambling den in Macau, through his old contacts. He had paid him £500,000 to lie. It was perjury, but it was the only way out. Diana's face remained impassive, but her hand gripped the notebook tight enough to turn her knuckles white. "Cross-examination?" the judge asked, looking at the prosecution. The lead prosecutor, a flustered man named Gareth Evans, stood up. He hadn't expected this. "Mr. Biggs, this is a surprising revelation. Do you have any proof?" "She paid cash," Biggs shrugged. "Smart woman. No paper trail." Arthur's smile widened. It was working. The gold digger narrative was flipping. Now she was the Black Widow. During the recess, Benedict Hastings pulled Diana into a private consultation room. "This is bad, Diana," Benedict said, wiping sweat from his brow. "Biggs is lying, obviously, but the jury loves a conspiracy. If they believe you set Arthur up, the whole case collapses. We need to discredit him." "We can't prove a negative," Diana said, her voice icy. "He says I paid cash. It's my word against his." "We need leverage," Benedict said. "Biggs has a weakness. Everyone does." Diana pulled out her phone. She opened an encrypted app. "Biggs has a daughter, Sophie. She's in university in Manchester. He's doing this for her tuition. Or maybe gambling debts." "We can't threaten his family, Diana," Benedict warned. "That makes us the villains." "I'm not going to threaten her," Diana said, typing rapidly. "I'm going to hire her." "What?" "Sophie Biggs is a brilliant data science student, top of her class. I'm offering her a full scholarship and a guaranteed job at Chimera Holdings starting today. A signing bonus of £50,000. "Diana, you can't bribe a witness's daughter." "It's not a bribe." Diana looked up, her eyes hard. "It's an investment. And when Tommy finds out that the woman he's framing is the one saving his daughter from the same student debt that crushed me, let's see if his conscience holds up." The trial resumed the next morning. The atmosphere was electric. Arthur felt victory within his grasp. He could see the doubt in the jurors' eyes. They were looking at Diana with suspicion now. Magnus Valerius was beaming. "We have them on the ropes, Arthur. One more day of this, and they'll offer a plea deal. You might walk with time served." Then the prosecution called a rebuttal witness. "The Crown calls Thomas Biggs back to the stand," Prosecutor Evans announced. Arthur frowned. "Why are they calling him back? He already testified." Biggs walked to the stand. He looked different today. He looked sick, pale. He refused to look at Arthur. "Mr. Biggs," the prosecutor said, "you approached the bench this morning with a request to amend your testimony. Is that correct?" "Yes," Biggs whispered. "Please speak up." "Yes," Biggs shouted, his voice cracking. I lied yesterday." The courtroom gasped. Arthur's stomach dropped. "Why did you lie, Mr. Biggs?" "Because I was paid," Biggs said, tears welling in his eyes. "Mr. Sterling, his lawyer, they found me. They promised me money. I needed it for my girl. She's got nothing. But last night," he choked up, "last night I found out that Mrs. Sterling, she paid off my girl's tuition, anonymously, years ago, through a charity." Arthur froze. That wasn't true. Diana had just done it yesterday. But she had backdated the paperwork. She had made it look like a long-standing act of charity. It was a masterstroke of manipulation. "She helped us when no one else would," Biggs sobbed, "and I tried to frame her. I can't do it. Arthur Sterling paid me to burn that warehouse. He told me to do it because the inventory was missing. He had already sold the goods on the black market and needed the fire to cover the theft." "Objection!" Magnus roared, jumping up. "Witness is hostile." "Witness is telling the truth," the prosecutor shouted back. "I have the recording," Biggs yelled, pulling a small digital recorder from his pocket. "I recorded the meeting in Macau. I recorded everything because I knew he'd double-cross me." The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. Arthur stared at the recorder in the plastic evidence bag the bailiff was now collecting. He looked at Diana. She wasn't taking notes anymore. She was looking right at him. She offered him a small, almost imperceptible nod. Checkmate. The verdict came down 3 days later. Guilty on all counts: fraud, embezzlement, arson, perjury. The judge, Justice Colloway, was merciless. Arthur Sterling, you have shown a level of greed and moral bankruptcy that is staggering even for this court. You not only defrauded your investors, you endangered lives and attempted to subvert the course of justice. I am sentencing you to 12 years in prison. Arthur was dragged away, kicking and screaming, his dignity left in tatters on the courtroom floor. But the story wasn't over. 2 weeks later, Diana sat in the boardroom of Sterling & Co., now rebranded as Blackwood and Miller. The office was bright, filled with young, hungry analysts and engineers. The toxic culture of Arthur's reign was being scrubbed away. Benedict Hastings walked in, carrying a final document. "It's done," Benedict said, placing the deed on the desk. The confiscation order went through. The state seized his personal assets to pay the fines. The penthouse, the cars, the yacht, and the estate, Diana asked. "Sterling Manor?" "That was trickier," Benedict admitted. "It was in a family trust. Technically, it belongs to his mother, Beatrice Sterling." "Beatrice," Diana mused. "The woman who told me on my wedding day that I should be grateful her son was marrying down so I could learn some class." "She's refusing to vacate," Benedict said. "She says the trust protects the property from Arthur's crimes." "The trust," Diana said, pulling a file from her drawer, "was funded by the dividends from the Leeds factory, the factory where my father worked, the factory that Arthur's father looted." She stood up and walked to the window. "The fruit of the poisonous tree," Diana said. "I traced the initial funding of that trust. It wasn't family money. It was pension money. Stolen pension money." "If we prove that—" Benedict trailed off, realizing the scope of her plan. "We don't just take the house, Benedict." Diana turned around. "We take the legacy. I want the Sterling name erased. I want that manor turned into a community center for the families of the workers they defrauded. I want the name Sterling to be synonymous with theft." "Beatrice will fight you," Benedict warned. "She has political connections." "Beatrice has nothing," Diana corrected, "because while Arthur was busy trying to frame me for arson, I was busy buying the bank that holds the mortgage on Sterling Manor. Beatrice missed 3 payments while she was funding Arthur's defense." Diana picked up her phone. "Call the eviction team," she said. "Tell them I want the keys by sunset. And tell Beatrice. Tell her the gold digger is coming to collect the dirt." The gravel driveway of Sterling Manor crunched under the tires of the convoy. It wasn't a parade of luxury sedans this time, but a grim procession of eviction trucks, police vehicles, and a single, understated black Range Rover. The manor, a sprawling 18th century estate in the Surrey countryside, stood defiant against the darkening sky. For generations, this house had been the seat of the Sterling family's power. It was where deals were made, governments were lobbied, and the fates of thousands of workers were decided over brandy and cigars. Today, it was just a house with a mortgage in default. Inside the Range Rover, Diana watched the rain lash against the window. She felt a strange calmness. The adrenaline of the trial, the chaos of the boardroom takeover, it had all faded into a quiet, steely resolve. "Are you sure you want to do this personally?" Benedict Hastings asked from the driver's seat. "The bailiffs can handle it. Beatrice Sterling is difficult." "She's not difficult, Benedict," Diana replied, unbuckling her seatbelt. "She's desperate, and a desperate Sterling is a dangerous thing. I need to see this through. For my father." She stepped out into the rain. An umbrella was immediately held over her head by one of her security team, a stoic man named Kieran. They walked up the massive stone steps, past the weeping stone lions that guarded the entrance. The heavy oak doors were already open. Inside the grand foyer, chaos reigned. Movers were carefully packing paintings and covering statues. Police officers were supervising the cataloguing of assets. Standing in the center of the hall, clutching a pearl necklace as if it were a rosary, was Beatrice Sterling. At 70, she was still a formidable woman. Her hair was perfectly coiffed, her tweed suit impeccable, but her eyes were wild with fury. "Get out!" Beatrice screamed at a young bailiff who was reaching for a Ming vase. "That has been in my family since the Opium Wars. You have no right." "Actually, Mrs. Sterling," Diana's voice cut through the noise like a knife, "he has every right. That vase was purchased with funds from the 1998 pension raid. It belongs to the creditors now." Beatrice spun around, her face contorted when she saw Diana. "You," she hissed, "the little archivist, the gold digger. You think because you tricked my foolish son, you can take my home." "I didn't trick Arthur," Diana said, walking closer, her heels clicking on the marble floor. "I exposed him. And I'm not taking your home, Beatrice. The bank is repossessing it. I just happen to own the bank." Beatrice laughed, a harsh, jagged sound. "You'll never be one of us, Diana. You can buy the debt, you can buy the company, but you will always be the daughter of a factory worker. You have no blood, no legacy." "Legacy?" Diana stopped a few feet away. She looked around the opulent hall at the portraits of sterling ancestors lining the walls, men who had built fortunes on the backs of the poor. "Let's talk about your legacy. Arthur is in Wandsworth Prison, serving 12 years for fraud and arson. Your husband died of a heart attack while under investigation for tax evasion. And you? You are being evicted from a house you haven't legally owned in 20 years because you used stolen pension funds to pay the upkeep." "Lies!" Beatrice shrieked. "My husband was a visionary." "Your husband was a thief," Diana said calmly. "And so was his son. My father, Gavin Miller, was a visionary. He envisioned a world where men like yours didn't get to starve families to buy Ming vases. He died for that vision. He hanged himself in a council flat because he couldn't look his wife in the eye after your husband stole his pension." The room went silent. The movers stopped. The police officers looked down. Beatrice's lip trembled. For the first time, the facade of the grand matriarch cracked. She looked small, old. You did all this for revenge," Beatrice whispered. "For a dead man." "Not revenge," Diana corrected gently. "Restitution. I calculated the total value of the stolen pensions, plus 30 years of interest and inflation. It came to exactly £420 million. The exact amount of debt I bought from Arthur. The exact value of this estate and the company combined." Diana reached into her purse and pulled out a single, folded document. "This is the deed to the manor," Diana said. "I'm transferring it." Beatrice's eyes lit up with a flicker of hope. You're giving it back?" Diana smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "No, I'm transferring it to the Miller Sterling Trust. It's a new charitable organization I formed this morning." "Charitable?" Beatrice faltered. "This house," Diana announced, her voice ringing out so everyone could hear her, "will no longer be a private residence. Starting next month, it will be the Gavin Miller Center for Labor Rights. It will provide free legal aid, housing support, and financial education to victims of corporate fraud. The ballroom will be a lecture hall. The bedrooms will be temporary housing for families who have lost their homes to predatory lenders." Beatrice gasped, clutching her chest. You're turning Sterling Manor into a shelter? For poor people?" "For the people you stole from," Diana corrected. "The irony is poetic, don't you think? The house built on stolen pensions will now be used to protect them." Beatrice stared at her, horror-struck. The ultimate insult. Her ancestral home, the symbol of her status, overrun by the very class of people she despised. "You are a monster," Beatrice spat. "I am a billionaire," Diana replied coolly, "and I have a schedule to keep. Kieran, please escort Mrs. Sterling to her vehicle. She has a room reserved at the Motel 6 on the A3. I've paid for the first week. After that, she's on her own." "Motel 6?" Beatrice screamed, as Kieran gently but firmly took her arm. "Get your hands off me. I am a Sterling." "Not anymore," Diana said, turning her back. "Now you're just another tenant being evicted." As Beatrice was led away, screaming obscenities that echoed off the vaulted ceiling, Diana didn't watch. She walked over to the fireplace, where a large oil painting of Arthur Sterling hung above the mantel. He was posed like a king, hand on a globe, looking out at a world he thought he owned. Diana looked at it for a long moment. Then she turned to one of the movers. "Take that down," she said, "and put it in the recycling. The frame is gold. Melt it down and donate the proceeds to the food bank. The canvas, burn it." 3 months later, the British winter had turned to a tentative spring. The daffodils were blooming in the churchyard of St. Jude's in Leeds. It was a quiet, humble place, far removed from the grandeur of Surrey. Diana walked along the narrow path, holding a simple bouquet of white lilies. She wore a heavy wool coat and a scarf, blending in with the few locals tending to their loved ones' graves. She stopped in front of a modest headstone. The stone was weathered, moss creeping into the letters. Gavin Miller, 1955 to 1998, beloved husband and father. Justice will not be served until those who are unaffected are as outraged as those who are. Diana knelt down and placed the flowers on the damp earth. She traced the letters of his name with her gloved finger. "It's done, Dad," she whispered. The wind rustled the trees, a soft, sighing sound. "The factory is reopening next week," she told the stone, "under the new management. The workers own 51% of the shares now. The pension fund has been fully restored. Mrs. Higgins, the lady who used to give me sweets when you were on strike, she got her check yesterday. She cried on the phone for an hour." Diana wiped a stray tear from her cheek. She had spent 10 years building a fortress of money and power around her heart. She had become someone else, someone colder, harder to survive in Arthur's world. But here, in front of this stone, she was just Diana again, the girl who missed her dad. "I sold the yacht," she continued, a small smile playing on her lips, "and the penthouse. I bought a small cottage in the Cotswolds. Benedict is retiring, and I think I might take a break. Maybe go back to school. Study history, like I always wanted. Before the war." She stood up, brushing the dirt from her knees. The weight that had been pressing on her chest for a decade was gone. The debt was paid. The ledger was balanced. As she turned to leave, her phone buzzed. It was a notification from the Financial Times. Breaking news. Sterling & Co. rebranded as Phoenix Trust. Stock prices soar as new employee ownership model, hailed as future of British industry. Below the headline was a picture of the old factory in Leeds, the gates open, workers streaming in with smiles on their faces. Diana switched off her phone. She didn't need to read the article. She had written the story. She walked out of the graveyard, past the iron gates, and into the sunlight. For the first time in her life, she didn't know what happened next. She had no plan, no enemy, no target. And it was the most beautiful feeling in the world. So there you have it. The story of Diana Miller, the woman who was called a gold digger, but turned out to be the one holding the shovel all along. She didn't just survive the shark tank of London's elite. She drained the water. It's a powerful reminder that in the game of life, the quietest person in the room is often the one holding the aces. Arthur Sterling thought he was discarding a wife, but he was actually triggering his own downfall. He forgot the golden rule: never underestimate someone who has nothing to lose and everything to fight for. Diana proved that true wealth isn't about what's in your bank account. It's about the legacy you leave behind and the people you protect. If you enjoyed this story of justice served cold, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow. What would you have done in Diana's shoes? Would you have taken the money and run, or stayed to fight for justice? Let me know in the comments below. And if you haven't already, hit subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss another story of scandal, revenge, and redemption. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.